everybody, welcome to the April edition of Trauma-Informed Care for UCC churches that are hosting families that are migrants or that are considering hosting families that are migrants. The purpose of these recordings and the purpose of these events is to not so much do the nuts and bolts of learning the mechanics of the refugee resettlement system. For example, we're not going to learn how to organize the stuff around getting a family resettled or what kind of visas they need. Instead, this is going to be an educational exercise in the best practices of engagement for vulnerable populations, and it includes a guided meditation to help the participants internalize understanding how to relate to vulnerable individuals. Although the session is being recorded, the recording will only focus on me and the presenter while walking through the presentation and the meditation, and it will maintain your privacy should you choose not to participate. Please keep your microphones muted so that that remains to be so, because if you speak when your microphone's open, the screen will flash to you. If you are interested in taking leadership and organizing your community to welcome immigrants, my colleague, the Reverend Noel Anderson from Church World Service, hosts a monthly meeting for that purpose. That's the leadership team of the UCC that organizes the strategy of how we approach our migration ministries. Or if you want to initiate a conversation on how your community can get started on the mechanics, the nuts and bolts of welcoming a family, I'm happy to have a tailored conversation with you separately. Just hit me up in my email and we can talk about what you can do. Currently, the most needed things are probably continuing to help resettle Afghans, as many of you are, and also as we are awaiting the impending overturning of Title 42, which is the border policy that's keeping the border closed. We're going to see a massive influx, at least in the month of June probably, of asylum seekers that are going to need sponsors across the United States. So if you are interested in sponsoring an asylum seeking family, please let me know separately in email and we can talk about what your church can do. Now, let us enter into a space of intentionality, listening, and willingness to learn, grow, and become fully present with our ministries. I'm going to open with a scripture reading from Matthew 11, verses 28 through 29. Come to me, all you who are weary and carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest in your souls. So I've been thinking a lot about the English class at the Refugee Resettlement Office that I worked at in Seattle. The student population of that class was almost entirely female, and many of them had been in that class for years and years past the 6-month contract that the refugee office had with them. And guess what? They still didn't really speak English. So if they weren't there because they were part of the resettlement program and their English wasn't even really improving, what were they doing in the class? You see, the English classes were kind of a community hub of the refugee office. Every day, someone brought a homemade cake or a game to play or just a portfolio of the most important gossip. Even if everyone didn't speak the same language, the language of love and friendship was communicated clearly in that space. And even if everyone wasn't from the same tribe or religion or ethnicity, we were all there together in that English class, making space for love in a world where many of them had experienced quite the opposite in their lifetimes. During Ramadan, which is a season we're in now, the Christians would hold fast with the Muslims during the class, or conversely, they would tease them lovingly by slurping tea in class. And sometimes we would even hold the classes at night so we could all break fast together. Even if the English classes weren't necessary for government monitoring, or they didn't produce the result of speaking English very well, that time together held a valuable space of sisterhood that was otherwise absent in the lives of these displaced and vulnerable women. So when Jesus said, "Come unto me, you who are weary, and I will give you rest," he didn't asterisk that with, "so you can produce good English," or "so you can fulfill government contracts." He didn't even say that you had to be proficient in any subject at all to find peace in him. For those women, the English classes, where they didn't really have to learn English, were the most valuable aspect of the refugee office. Holding that space for love, homemade cakes, gossip, and rest were what strengthened those women to get through their days. Now, that was 7 years ago, but I imagine that those same women are still sitting in that same room, maybe with slightly better English, but infinitely better spiritual wholeness because of that space. So may we be the spaces of English classes that don't really offer English for the migrant populations that we serve. Amen. It is now my pleasure to introduce to you Kaitlin Roberson, who will be presenting on the power and brain chemistry of human connection. Kaitlin is a refugee and immigrant advocate working with various NGOs in Texas. She's the former director of major gifts at Refugee Services of Texas, where she coordinated fundraising, education, and advocacy initiatives for RST statewide. Kaitlin is now the co-founder and CEO of Cacti, a plant-based medicine company developing chronic pain and trauma therapies for displaced populations and veterans. She is an educational master's from Harvard University in human development and psychology with an emphasis on childhood adversity and trauma care for refugees. Welcome, Kaitlin. I hand the floor to you.
Thank you so much, Reverend Hassan. And Ramadan Mubarak to everyone. This is a beautiful month, and it's maybe rainy and stormy, but my mom taught me the little poem when I was little: April showers bring May flowers. So hopefully we're going to have lots of flowers after all of this rain. I'd like to start with a short little poem. This month has been special because I also got to celebrate Nowruz, which is the first time I've celebrated that holiday with my Sufi friends. And they gave me this beautiful book of poetry. And there was one that made me think of our time together this evening. It says, "The shower of your love grants me life. The rainfall of your love purifies my soul. Oh, my beloved, grant me the mercy of your nourishing rain. Let it be the raiment of my love, life, and soul." So I will share my screen, and I just have 10 slides, mostly to keep me on track so that I don't go all over the place. And we'll just go through these together. And then I have a special guided journaling exercise that we'll all do at the end. So I want to spend plenty of time. I want to say plenty of time for that. So first, I thought, since this talk is an inherently relational talk, because I'm going to be sharing about how human connection heals trauma, it helps mitigate trauma in the body and brain. I want you to be able to get to know me. And, since we're not in person, this is the best we can do is hearing me share a little bit about my journey into this work with refugees and immigrants. And my journey has been a winding path, as it is for many humanitarians and aid workers. It's not always a straight shot, and mine definitely was not. So back when I was 18, I went to Romania for the first time. And then I went back again in college for 9 weeks, and I worked in the Romanian orphanages. I worked with the Roma children and with babies, and saw firsthand what happens when there's attachment trauma, a lack of healthy connection with a caregiver, an adult, with anyone really. These babies were left in their cribs and fed, but not held while they were fed. And sometimes they would lie in their soiled diapers for hours on end, before they were cared for. And, if you've studied at all about human development and psychology, you've heard about these, really the case study of Romania, what happened there in the orphanages with neglect and abuse, and how damaging that was to the brain. Well, you can imagine in my early 20s, that was probably, if I could pinpoint the single most impactful experience in my life, as far as setting me up for the trajectory that I would choose professionally, it was that time in the orphanages and really seeing firsthand what happens when there isn't healthy human connection. So I came back from that experience and I began reading everything I could about attachment theory and connection, and read books like The Whole Brain Child and Parenting from the Inside Out, and was trying to understand what I had experienced. But even the understanding of trauma and trauma's impact on young developing brains was a really new field of study. It wasn't even recognized by the American Psychology Association until 2006. And this was about that time. This was like 2002. So really in the last 20 years have we grown in our understanding of the role that trauma has in the developing brain. And now we have things like the ACE scoring metric that shows us adverse childhood experiences and what that, what those adverse experiences early on in development, how they impact the health of a person throughout their life, increase of all kinds of, oh, my watch is talking to me, increase of, diabetes, heart disease, cancer, a higher risk of all kinds of different diseases just because of early childhood traumatic events. So anyway, this was before we even, back in the early 2000s, this is before we had this understanding of trauma's role. But I was reading and studying what I could. And fast forward to my late 20s, I lived in Israel for 3 years. And in Israel, I met a group of Sudanese refugees. They had walked there from Sudan to Israel to seek asylum. And their dads were held in detention centers, and the moms and children were left at the mercy of the community. But the children didn't have schooling. They didn't have even, a very basic preschool curriculum. So we started a preschool in a Druze village, giving the kids something constructive to do during the day so that they weren't sitting with their mothers with nothing to do. And the mothers were very depressed. And that was my first exposure to family separation policy, what it looks like to migrate and then be separated from your family. From there, we moved to Boston, and in 2016, as many of you remember, the travel ban was issued. And once again, I'm seeing on television this time, Syrian families separated in the airport, not able to reunite with their families. And I'm once again seeing this pattern of traumatic experiences in migration and how those traumas break human connection. They break connection from the country of origin, but then they also break connection within the family and within themselves. And so I got really committed then to go back to school and make this the rest of my professional experience to serve the larger refugee community. And so that's how I ended up in school in 2019, studying refugee and immigrant advocacy, a child protection certificate program, and studying about early childhood adversity and trauma. So 2020, as we all know, was an interesting time to graduate. And I realized I wasn't going to be taking any overseas appointments. So I moved our family to Texas to really understand the human migration story on the front lines of the US story, Texas. And it's been wonderful. We've been here for almost 2 years now. Oh, now my dog's going to join us for this. We've been here for almost 2 years. And I've not only, gotten to know the refugee resettlement world, but also all the NGOs serving asylum seekers on the border. So I want to situate what I'm going to share with you about human connection a little bit in context of what's happening worldwide right now. And we won't go through this whole slide. Like Irene said, we're not getting into the nitty gritty of displacement. We're going to spend our time on an exercise that helps us connect with those who are displaced. But I just want to highlight that about 50% of the world's displaced are children. And that's significant because, again, these migration traumas are happening during the developing years and during a time when the brain is, hardwiring and forming neural connections and really setting that person up for their lifelong relational connections. So it's significant that most of this trauma is happening at a very young age. And of course, now these numbers are not in reflection of the Ukraine crisis. Now we're over 94 million displaced worldwide. And then I just wanted to share that a little bit about the trauma of migration, mostly just highlighting that there is often trauma that leads to the initial flight. So that's pre-migration. And then there can be very traumatic events that happen during the migration story. And then there's trauma post-migration as refugees or asylum seekers find themselves situated in wherever they land, whether they're resettled, and most are not resettled. Less than 1% of the world's refugee population are ever resettled. So most of them land in nearby the countries proximate to the conflict. And just like what we're seeing with Ukraine, where most of them fled into Romania and Moldova and Poland. And often the countries they flee into don't have all of the social safety nets, all of the structures and supports to help with things like mental health care and mental health services. And then there can be disruption in the schooling, and that causes some educational gaps and trauma around that. And there's often a mismatch between what the host country understands of the refugee. And so there's a lot of stigma around addressing the mental health issues. So they may carry a lot of trauma with them, but then wherever they land, find that they don't have the supports or the language to talk about what they're feeling. And a lot of refugees will talk about their trauma in terms of just loneliness, sadness. Again, that's speaking to the disconnection they feel. They've been, they've had that disconnect from Earth, from the place of birth, from their country, their culture, their families. All of those severing points of the relationship add to the relational trauma they feel. I wanted to share too, this is from my recent trip to the border. This is in a shelter right on the US-Mexico border. And the children over here, we got out some modeling clay. And
Hi, Kaitlin. I apologize. I'm just going to stop you real quick.
Yeah.
I'm not seeing what you're seeing. All I see, I don't know about everyone else, but I see something that says thank you. It's your end slide.
Okay.
So yeah. So why don't you try clicking the slide that you're talking about?
Yeah. Let me see if I can go back. So you're seeing the very last slide?
Correct.
Huh.
I see your mouse hovering. I saw your mouse hover over the slides for a second. So if you'll just go back over the slides and try double clicking there.
Yeah, I did. And what I see is I'm very, very back at the beginning. Let me just stop the share and try again.
Yeah, try again.
So you didn't see any of the slides then?
Unfortunately, no.
Okay.
Zoom problems.
Zoom problems.
We'll get through it. This is not the first time or the last time this has happened.
Okay, let me see if I can. I'll end the show and then start it again.
There we go. I can see what you see now. I see blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God.
Okay.
You wanted to click
so
on?
That's where I was just talking about my own journey. And then I was showing the global displacement numbers.
I can see what you see now. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So should I go into slideshow though mode so that let's see if that works. Now do you see the global human movement slide? Okay, perfect. And then this was just situating what happens, the trauma that people experience along the way. And this is the border picture. So now are you seeing a picture with children?
No.
Okay, that's so strange. All right, so let's just end the show and I'll just show
Now
it
I
like,
see it.
okay, that's so strange. So when I put it in slide mode, it's just not working.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Okay,
keep it
that's
out of
fine.
slide mode.
Okay, no problem. We'll just leave it out of slide mode. No problem. Okay, so anyway, in the shelters, I'm sharing this picture with you because in the center of that picture is Norma, Sister Norma Pimentel. And I just want to highlight that there are these amazing humanitarians that have this incredible ability to connect with asylum seekers in a way that is just, you know, she's been called the modern day Mother Teresa for a reason, but I saw her in a documentary, and that's why I wanted to highlight to you guys in this documentary, she's interacting with the children, she's playing with them down on their level, she's making eye contact. She's one of those people that doesn't turn away from the pain, she moves right toward it, and just really, you know, forms that connection in a moment. And if there's anything that you guys take away from tonight, it's that mitigating trauma is through human connection. You don't have to be credentialed and highly trained and go through all kinds of, you know, psychology or psychiatry training to just connect with people face to face in a warm, you know, with warmth, with humility, hearing their story, sitting down, listening to their experiences. And with these kids, we didn't speak their language, and all the children lined up with the Play-Doh. There were several different languages represented around that table, but it's amazing how much we can communicate with twinkling eyes and squishing the Play-Doh and making funny shapes and making little animals and making the animals pretend to talk to each other. And the kids loved it. They went from sitting and being fussy and crying with their parents in this big room with nothing to, you know, to smiling and interacting with us in this really special way. So I'm inspired by people like Sister Norma, who just take the time to connect in a very human way. And one of the things that they've taught us in the shelters on the US-Mexico border is not to ask about people's journey, because that can take them back to the painful memory and stir up the trauma, but instead just ask them, how are you feeling? What's your name? My name is, and we use Google Translate, and it's messy with Google Translate because we're switching back between languages. But, you know, the simplest eye contact and sometimes, you know, gentle touch on a shoulder, really, you can see the change in people's countenance with those little moments of human connection. So let me explain a little bit about how trauma ends up living in the brain. And then we'll go into the exercise that I want to do at the end. I'm married to a neuroscientist, so I'm trying not to get into the, you know, deep into the science of this, but just so that we can understand how human connection can calm the brain and calm the mind, and why, you know, why it's so important. So what happens in trauma is when trauma occurs, it gets stuck in the brain and body. And how we mitigate it is through this connection. Now, the fear center of the brain gets activated in any kind of traumatic event. And the brain enters this state of really high alert where it's basically saying danger, danger, danger. And it's almost like it gets stuck in this negative feedback loop of danger, danger, danger. And in this negative feedback loop, it causes the brain to become overly sensitized. And so when this oversensitization occurs, these negative feelings become easily triggered. And unfortunately, pain, anxiety, depression get looped up in that negative feedback loop and in that oversensitization. And so that's why sometimes people who have trauma in their body may feel it as physical pain. And interestingly, even cultures that have a lot of stigma around trauma and mental health issues, and they wouldn't necessarily use language like I'm depressed or I feel anxious, they do feel comfortable talking about their pain. So they might say, my back hurts, I have a bad migraine headache. And so that can be kind of a clue, right? A clue to us that something more could be going on, because sometimes pain gets caught up in that loop. So traditional talk therapy does really little to relieve these symptoms, and can actually cause more pain, because talking about the traumatic event activates the brain and nervous system all over again. And that's where you hear about things like, what are the things that are re-traumatizing? And sometimes talking about the event can stir up all of these emotions, raise the cortisol levels, et cetera, and be re-traumatizing. So when I sit with people in the shelters, I don't ask them about their journey, which may be full of these painful experiences. Instead, like I mentioned before, I start with, how are you feeling? Is there anything you need right now? Can I get you a cup of water? Human connection is beautifully simple, and it crosses cultural and linguistic barriers. A smile, the warmth in your eyes is all that's needed. So here's how the brain calms down from this high alert, oversensitized state. Human connection acts as a buffering mechanism in the mind. This is known as social buffering. It's the same effect that a child experiences when their mother is with them during a hard event. You can, if you put, a heart rate monitor on the child, even when the difficult situation is present, whether, they're about to get a shot at the doctor's office or whatever it is, if a mother's comfort is there with them, it's calming to them. And this is this idea of social buffering. But we can create that for people by sitting with someone in their distress. It creates this sense of safety, and it helps regulate the body's stress response system. And it's that stress response system that there's nothing wrong with it. It's not wrong for the brain to go on high alert. You can see how it's very protective, actually. It, keeps us running, like we run from danger. We even shut down completely. In its extreme, you might pass out if if your body was experiencing too much trauma, too much pain. It would just really shut down. And that's meant to be, our whole body's stress response system is meant to be protective. It's when it gets stuck, when that trauma doesn't pass through quickly and is resolved in a healthy way, that it ends up living in the body in a way that's maladaptive. So we don't fully understand. I'm going to click to this slide. And it's going through the slides right now as I click over them. Okay, I'm going to assume that it is. So we don't fully understand who's more resilient to trauma and that post-traumatic stress syndrome, PTSD, where trauma gets stuck. We don't know what makes one person more resilient than another, but we do know that the single most common factor for children to develop resilience is at least one stable, committed relationship with a supportive parent or caregiver or other adult. And like I said, this doesn't have to be a family member. So now you can begin to see how your connection in a faith community can be that single relationship that helps really mitigate and calm the mind and bring peace to the body. And it only takes one calm moment of connection to calm the body system. From a stormy, if you think of it in the analogy of a storm, you're bringing that person to a peaceful island from the storm and the chaos that's surrounding them. So this kind of social buffering and this kind of being present with people in their pain and suffering and being that calm, peaceful presence is known as presencing therapy instead of cognitive behavior therapy or CBT, the traditional top therapy that we think of when we're dealing with therapists. So I like this idea of presencing therapy. All right. And so what I try to encourage faith communities to consider is how they create those places of belonging, just like Reverend Hassan was describing earlier, that ESL class can be that safe place, a sanctuary. And that's, I can't think of a more beautiful role for faith communities than to be a safe place to hold pain and joy, and not just the collective community holding that pain and joy too, but individuals being vessels of love and healing. What's critical is that we've learned to receive love ourselves so that we're not drawing from a dry well, so that we're not pouring out from an empty vessel. And I can't encourage this enough in faith communities, that we have to be doing our own work of healing. We have to be learning to receive love learning to be at peace in ourselves. And so that's the exercise I'm going to take you through, is this calming, peaceful journaling exercise. So we have to learn that ourselves to model it for others. But faith communities can be that beautiful place of modeling emotional maturity. And an emotionally mature person is one who isn't trying to fix someone else. You're not trying to take away their trauma or think that you have, the answer to their pain or suffering. Instead, you're just being with them in a peaceful, calm presence. Oh, this picture I love. This is from a soccer festival we had in the fall, and it was the first time we got our refugee community together after COVID. And these little sisters did the face painting and the beads, and I just loved their sweet play. It was such a beautiful day together. In fact, I didn't mention that, but all the pictures on this slideshow are either from the border in the shelter or at the soccer festival, where we got together with the community and all laughed and played and just had wonderful moments of human connection, which, by the way, can happen through play and dance and eating together and just being together in moments of great joy. So recently I learned this, that slide got a little bit messed up. Recently, I learned this approach called manual journaling. It was developed by Dr. Jim Wilder and Dr. Carl Lehman. And this is what I'm going to take us through at the end here. And I actually have, I'll stop sharing this in a second and show you a handout to help us. So if you have a pen and pencil nearby, this is there's aspects of this approach to passing the peace, it's called, to being with people in their suffering and helping them experience the peace within them, the peace from the divine, whatever their religion is. It doesn't have to be, it's not necessarily Christian centric, although this approach was developed around that Christian lens. But they've sat with refugees from Syria and Germany and that were Muslim, and they've done the same in the Gaza Strip. And it works in all different cultural contexts. And it's just the idea of sharing peace with another and helping them, instead of reminding them of a painful memory, you're going to a place where they can access peace within and peace from the divine. And in that place, begin to process some of the feelings that need to be processed for trauma to move through the body in a really healthy way. So this exercise just helps us find peace in the midst of suffering. And it's where we can see, again, God, the divine, in any given moment, whatever that looks like. And so it's an exercise. It's a little out of our typical comfort zone because it's we're actually going to listen to whatever we hear from our connection with God. And I'll show you the handout. I'm going to stop sharing now. But if anyone wants to reach out to me after this talk, grab my email, and that's my Instagram handle too. And you're welcome to reach out to me anytime, and I'll put that in the chat. But let me stop sharing this and see if I can pull up the handout really quick. And actually, before I do that, even I want to put a couple. I'll put it in the chat, and then you could either pull it up on your computer in case this doesn't work when I do the screen share. So here are the links. And if you'd like to learn more about passing the peace, it's from these links, presenceandpractice.com, the manual journaling approach, and then the life model works is where you'll find a booklet called Passing the Peace. And it's meant for all kinds of faith communities, but they've used it, like I said, in lots of different refugee contexts. And I personally used it with a group of women out in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and found it to be incredibly healing for whatever we were going through in our lives, which did include, pain and suffering as well. So those are the links. And let me see if we pull up.
Also, if you're watching this recording later, these links will be in the email that this recording is attached to.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so if you're able to click on the PDF, let me see. I did get it to pull up, which it might be easier. Let me see if I can share really quick. Okay, do you see the PDF that says thought rhyming in my share?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So this, I'm going to take us through this, and then we'll have a few minutes to do it on our own before we wrap up. So you start with seeing yourself from God's perspective. So when the number one is, I can see you, the example is, I can see you pacing back and forth in your living room with the lights on, or in my case, it's God talking to me saying, I can see you sitting at your desk right now. I can see that your voice is a little shaky because you're nervous right now, and you're thinking about all the things you forgot to say and the things you did say. I'm thinking about what God is seeing in me, in my internal world right now. And I'm just writing free. It's a free, flow of your thoughts, and you're just trying to get out on paper. If God was looking down on you and seeing inside of you all of your feelings, and in your environment too, the desk you're sitting at, the people you're surrounded with. And then you go to, I can hear you. And it can be, I can hear you saying to yourself, how will I ever get everything done? Why isn't my partner helping me and concerned about this as much as I am about it? And so the first is I can see you. The second is I can hear you. And again, you're writing out your thoughts on what God, you're imagining God hearing all of your thoughts that are spoken and unspoken. And then the third step is imagine God, who knows you well, is validating your experience with compassion. So number 3 is, I understand how big this is for you, and I understand how you feel. And so then you write from that perspective of how, Kaitlin, I understand why you feel nervous. I understand how this feels hard for you, but I'm with you. I'm with you right here. And then number 4 is, I'm glad to be with you, and I see your weakness tenderly. So you imagine God calling your name lovingly and simply enjoying being with you. How do you perceive God might be with you and speak to you in a kind, tender, and loving way? So you take a moment to enjoy his loving presence. And this is where people sense the peace. And that's what you want to help them access, is this inner peace that is available to everyone, even in the midst of difficult circumstances, even in the midst of trauma and pain. They've used this journaling approach, and there's also like a prayer approach. They've used this in disaster zones and really intense situations, just trying to help people access one little piece of peace and be able to then build the more and more compassion and peace around a really difficult moment. And so then you imagine God assuring you that he has the power to help you and give you everything that you need. So you say, I can do something about what you're going through. And you write out from that perspective of God seeing your suffering, seeing the hard, and saying, I'm with you in it, and I have something, I can do something for you. And then the last part of this exercise, when you're doing it in a group, and like I said, I did it with a group of 7 women, you read your interaction with God out loud to someone you trust. So first of all, we just journaled quietly by ourselves, and we went through this, this format, this guideline. And then when we were all done, we would share it out loud with each other. And there's really so much power in healing and sharing, sharing that collective pain and healing together. And then it also acts as like a check and balance that, if someone were to hear something unkind from God, or that doesn't match who we know God to be, his nature, his character, then, you can help gently remind, like, oh, that's interesting, because I see God as compassionate and loving, and, he's with you in a loving, kind way. And so that the idea is that we don't have to be, it's a strange exercise to think of ourselves as hearing God and writing out his thoughts, but we don't have to be afraid of, getting that wrong. And we have each other as checks and balances to remind us of the true character and nature of God, which is loving and kind. So I'll just take, I don't know, how long do you think we should spend? Maybe 10 minutes? And then will that still be enough time for you to wrap up?
Yeah, usually we wrap up the exercise about now, so that there's time for questions.
Sure. So we don't have to go through this together. At least I was able to share it, and you guys have the link to it yourself. If you would rather experience this on your own, I definitely encourage everyone to try it in their journaling time this week. At the beginning of it, there's this interactive gratitude. It's just a more simple approach to it, where you literally start from a place, it's like a gratitude journal, right? You just start from a place of gratitude, and you're sharing your heart with God about something that you're thankful for, and then you're listening for his response to that. But all of these exercises just help us experience both the presence of the divine and his peace that we all have access to. And it's something that we can do with others too, to help them experience and access peace. And it's really interesting doing it with people that don't have a relationship with God at all, but they do find, again, that inner peace, that inner knowing, inner voice. So I'll stop my share.
So I think this is a beautiful exercise. I love it. I'm going to do this.
Yeah, I'm sorry that I ran over and didn't give us time to do it.
No, it's fine. This is actually the way that I usually do this, is provide materials that can be used for later.
Okay, great.
In the privacy of one's own community. I do have a question about this exercise.
Yes.
So are you suggesting that this exercise be done just for the congregants, like the church people, or should the church people be doing this with their refugee families at some point? And if they're going to do it with their refugee families, how would they know if this is an appropriate exercise to introduce to them?
Right. So I would encourage you all to look at the lifemodelworks.org website and get your hands on a copy of Passing the Peace, because it outlines how they use this with refugees and migrants in different even war zones. And so it goes into the details of how to do this appropriately in a way that is not imposing anything, is not proselytizing, is not, you know, where it is an exercise of just helping people calm their body and mind, and again, like just sharing peace. And I read through the whole booklet, and it's very good. And I would encourage you to look to that resource for how you would incorporate this with, you know, newly resettled refugees. And in the meantime, encourage people to do it with their group. You know, if you're a faith community who is working together on a team of welcomers, for example, this would be a great exercise to work on your own, you know, centering and grounding, again, working on our own emotional maturity, our own spiritual growth. And then we're better equipped to love and serve, you know, people that are in our circles of influence.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Like I said, I really love it. I'm going to personally use it. Yes, Nancy, go ahead.
Sorry, my camera is a little funny. I was just going to ask, have you heard of the changing of genes because of trauma? I read something recently about a study that's being conducted, and just wanted to know if you had heard anything more about that.
Yes. And, you know, I should say, again, my training is in human development and psych, but I am not a physician, and I don't have a medical degree. And I mentioned I'm married to a neuroscientist, but that does not give me a medical degree. But yes, what you're referring to is epigenetics. And from what I understand, yes, it is true that generational trauma gets expressed in our genes, and it does change, slightly changes the genome over time. And can that be reversed? Can it be healed? I actually think the mind, the brain is incredibly, the potential for healing is really incredible. And we're learning more and more about that now, with studies around the neuroplasticity of the mind, and how even, you know, children who were hardwired around traumatic events can still be able to open the mind again and lay down new pathways, new neural connections, new stories that can reverse an otherwise, you know, what we thought maybe 20 years ago was fixed and couldn't be changed. Does that answer your question about epigenetics?
Yes.
It's really interesting.
I was just, when you first hear that trauma could be expressed in genes, it's really hard to wrap your mind around that. And I think it's a kind of harsh thought, really, the permanency of what trauma can do.
Yes. Yeah. And I'm sure you guys have talked about this book in your other meetings, but a good book on understanding how trauma lives in the body is The Body Keeps the Score by Vanderkolk. That's a really interesting book about, you know, how literally trauma lives in the body, in the mind. And, you know, we're beginning to discover ways that can be resolved and healed. But it's still a relatively, you know, our understanding of trauma, its impact, its long-term impact is relatively young. I'm actually coming out to Boston middle of May for the Trauma Research Foundation's annual conference. And that will be really interesting to learn, you know, about all the different groups studying how to better heal and better care for trauma. And what I didn't mention at the beginning of my story is the reason I left the resettlement world was because I do feel that trauma is the one piece of the migration story that's the most under addressed, and it's the biggest unmet need. And trauma does keep, keep all of us from being able to deeply connect with each other, integrate into our communities, fully function and be our best selves in our work. Trauma, unaddressed trauma can really rear its ugly, its ugly head in different circumstances. And if healing is possible, I want to have better trauma healing tools for displaced populations. And one of the biggest barriers is around cultural stigma and other societal factors that keep different cultures from accessing help with mental health issues. So we're trying to understand that better and not just be, the humanitarian world says they're trauma informed, but what does that actually mean in practice? And even among the aid workers, experiencing a lot of secondary trauma, absorbing a lot of trauma in their bodies and not having the tools, not having the supports or the resources to process their trauma in a healthy way.
And Kaitlin, this is exactly why we have this meeting that we do every month, as I have said exactly what you've said repeatedly, is that the reason why I don't work for refugee resettlement services either anymore, and I work for the church, is because the refugee resettlement system is just overwhelmed with caseload and needing to meet contracts and things like this. And we, the church, have the ability to meet the space of that gap in some ways, to provide love and care. So that's what we're doing right now, is learning how to do that responsibly. And we appreciate your expertise. I think we have time for one more question if anyone has one.
I had a question.
Sure.
I just went to I think it's the LifeWorks website, and you had mentioned a booklet that you recommended. Could you please give me the name of the booklet again?
Passing the Peace.
Oh, Passing the Peace. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I tried to get a hold of a physical copy, and on it, you can order it off Amazon too, but it wasn't available until May. So they were gracious and shared a PDF version for me so I could read through the whole thing. And I decided it's best to just let each faith community, explore these tools themselves and decide if it's right for your group.
And all of these materials will be included in the email when the recording of this becomes available, as well as Kaitlin's email, so that you can connect with her and learn more about Cacti, which she recently founded, or any other resources that you're interested in learning more about. This does come to the end of our time today. Next month, we are going to be hosting... Sorry, hold on. We're going to be hosting Tanya Longino of the Peace Center in Langhorne, Pennsylvania, who's going to be presenting on the steps to understanding racial bias in working with refugees. Let us pray together as we close out our time today. Dear Lord God, thank you for bringing us together on this day. May we go forth into the world more open, more caring, more willing to work on ourselves and to grow and to be fully who you mean us to be. Thank you for this time in which our minds were opened to learn more about you being present with us, you seeing us, you hearing us, you being willing to walk with us on the journey so that we are able to walk on that journey with others and help them transform into fully who you mean them to be, so that this becomes a more just world, so this becomes a more beautiful and loving world that has greater hope and greater peace in your very best understanding. Amen. May you go forth into the world, and thank you for all you do to serve migrants in your communities. And
thank you all
Kaitlin.
so much. I really enjoyed being with each of you.
Thanks. I was going to show my face. Bye-bye.
All right. Thanks, Kaitlin. I'm going to stop the recording.
Wonderful. Thank you.